this book, it should be a bombshell. They had laws where basically you didn't have to register as a sex offender if that person, I believe, was like 17 or even 16.
16, yeah.
Yes. So there was some that were even lower than that. So there were a slew of states, including New Mexico. I think there was only about 20 plus states he actually had to register at all as a sex offender in. That was one of the loopholes. And that's the next thing that nobody talks about with Epstein. You want to know what I think he was doing? I think he was also making arms deals. Why is that? Prince Andrew was the UK's largest arms dealer. That's what his gig was in the royal family.
You had some great content. You know, one of the only people on YouTube that I could see had content about this kind of subject. Very, you know, people have definitely gotten banned for this kind of thing. But
and on YouTube, I mean, they took about 20 Epstein videos off too. I mean, that was one of the biggest things that I got censored on that no one ever really talks about. And that was even pre-COVID. It got worse during the COVID era. But they started hitting me with cyberbullying for my videos on Maxwell and Epstein. And in particular, the ones where I was like reading the documents about, for instance, buying the Eastern European girl from her parents when she was just a kid and all those things. So I was a bad dude for doing that. And I've been covering this. I mean, I don't know what you guys know about my history, but I'm the first guy Alex Jones ever gave a show to all the way back in like 2009, maybe. I was a substitute host. And back then in 2008, when this broke, we were covering it. So I've been covering this forever. I also interviewed Maria Farmer for any of like investigation discovery. You can still find that for over an hour where she talks about Wexner being the head of the snake and all these things.
Yeah.
I've been in it to win it for a while, brother. You know, this is a real subject. It goes well beyond left or right. It always has. And I hate everybody. So...
Yeah, it definitely goes well beyond.
And if you ask me the questions, you're going to hear, you know, like a lot of people want to exonerate Trump. And it's like, hey, man, they definitely had a relationship together. And it's even been reported in the media, never refuted. I'm not saying it, but you can look into it, that Melania was actually introduced to Trump through Epstein, through one of his model parties, where essentially 20 plus women were vying for the job of Donnie's next wife.
That's interesting. And I know you mentioned Head of the Snake. We talked to somebody in New Mexico, actually, who gave us some pretty inside information that we're going to have in the documentary. But they told us to watch the documentary Head of the Snake. I don't know if that's exactly what you were referring to, but it's got...
So Head of the Snake is a reference to...
Wexner?
Yeah, and Wexner, and her repeatedly saying that he was essentially the head of the snake. And so far, he's been the main guy that has been exonerated legally. He's being represented by Dershowitz. And even in the realm of the lawsuit, right? You had, for instance, Virginia Giuffre Roberts, which is probably the most visible victim and who has come out with the most allegations, although there are others by Sarah Ronsum and others that you can openly read their documents. Now, she actually recanted on saying that Dershowitz was there and involved, and she saw it, and she now says she was mistaken. Now, there were some sketchy emails that had actually been released prior to that, but that doesn't make Dershowitz a good guy to me. And one of my biggest things is I can't stand when people on the right or left have him as a guest. They believe him when he says he only visited the island one time and received a massage from an old woman. I've yet to see any evidence or pictures that there were any women there providing massages that were over their 20s. Okay, that's another thing that people don't really understand about this network of compromise. For instance, is there's a focal point on the children aspect, and there should be, and the young girls. But some of these people who may have been protected in that quote unquote sweetheart deal obviously took to their abuse and ended up working for Epstein. That's 100%. For instance, Nadia Marcinkova in the documents, who is alleged to be the person that was bought at a very young age, ends up flying helicopters for him and is very much in that network. And there are plenty other women that have been named in that network that seem to be shielded, such as Leslie Groff or Sarah Palin.
You know, it's interesting you bring up the network, right? And we've been looking a lot into the King family, who, you know, Epstein bought the Zoro Ranch property from, who was the governor of New Mexico. I don't remember the entire spectrum of time that he was the governor there, but nonetheless, he still owns the property all around Epstein, kind of insulating him from everyone else. Now, if I remember right, it's you can't even get to the property without going through the king's land, meaning like he's like almost sheltered by the family. And there's interesting things like Epstein also donated like I think it was $50,000 more or something more than that to his campaign when he was running and things like that. So, what do you make of kind of the connections in New Mexico, and why do you think New Mexico is the spot that he picked to put his ranch on?
Well, let's look at that property. Like you said, it's shielded from everything. It's almost like on a peak. And this would be speculation on my part because we don't have a real investigation into the ranch. And all we've seen are what's been presented in court cases and the media of this extensive area where there was a whole part of the facility for women to become pregnant in a eugenics operation that has actually been reported on. And I know that sounds like science fiction, but I would tell people this. It's been largely underreported that Steve Bannon was meeting with Epstein just prior to the midterms in 2018. Now, the first source was Roger Stone. And then when it did come out, basically Bannon said he was taping him for a documentary. Now, there's a short trailer for that documentary, The Monsters. Now, apparently there's 16 hours of this footage.
Yeah.
But when they start talking about the island in particular, not Zoro Ranch, we'll get there in a moment. He says, well, 2 islands. And he goes, Islands of Dr. Moreau. Now, I don't know whether it's edited or not, but Epstein says that is correct. And obviously that would be a reference to eugenics and chimeric type experiments taking place at the island. And again, if you believe the reporting on Zoro Ranch, also at the ranch. Now, the speculation would be that there was an underground part of this facility. We know at least with the case of Wexner and his mansion in New York, according to Maria Farmer, there was a full room of people that were readily watching surveillance cameras and taping every single one of those rooms. You have to expect that in, I would say, the majority, if not all, of these residences or places where esteemed individuals are being talked to, negotiated with. I mean, read the emails right now that are coming out in this JP Morgan and Virgin Islands case. And it seems like everybody knows they're joking about Epstein and Miley Cyrus and Hannah Montana. You have Jess Staley in a conversation with him about women or young girls, it's not specified, dressed up like Disney characters and what he would prefer next. Snow White, Beauty and the Beast. You can't make this stuff up. So this is going on a very, very long time. And what's interesting about Maria Farmer's case is that she blew the whistle in 96, according to her, to both NYPD and FBI, and nothing was done. So now you have this establishment in New Mexico. You name some pretty esteemed people right there. Who you didn't name is somebody who's in many of these court documents as an apparent and alleged abuser of underage girls. And that would be Bill Richardson.
Bill Richardson, yeah.
And Bill Richardson has massive connections in the geopolitical arena. I remember when he was running for president back in 2008. He's a good old boy. He's in the Bohemian Club, right? And at the time, when a lot of these allegations are happening to Bill Richardson, guess what? He is the governor of New Mexico. He's also very, very involved with the Council on Foreign Relations and the Clintons as well in their different NGOs.
Yeah, I mean, as was Epstein was on those as well. The Trial Commission and Council on Foreign Relations. So,
I believe like Hunter Biden's involved a lot too. I believe he was close with Bill Richardson through, didn't they? They had some company together, which they were both on the board of advisors, that was then sold later on to China, which is weird.
And I believe there were some other nepotistic relationships of other politicians on that same board. It didn't just stop at Richardson and Hunter Biden.
Right.
So, you look at this and it's a network, and we haven't even talked about Ghislaine Maxwell, whose father was outed as not only a media mogul, but also an intelligence asset. And, I know that Seymour Hersh is making his rounds in the media again. A lot of people forget that it was Seymour Hersh that first exposed the Israeli Mossad connections to Maxwell himself. Before Maxwell's death, he actually sued Hersh, and there was a smear campaign then that Hersh had fallen for a hoax. I believe it was 2 or 3 years after the death of Maxwell. Guess what? Hersh won his case, and there were no retractions on the front page. Those were relegated to back pages of these newspapers. So really a lot of the things that we end up discussing here are whispered history. For instance, were we going to get justice in the Epstein case with somebody like Bill Barr connected to it? Bill Barr himself, before the arrest, said that he may have to recuse himself of any type of investigation into Epstein. Why? Because he worked for one of the law firms that represented Epstein for a very long time. I believe it was Kirkland and Ellis, if I'm not mistaken. So you can watch that testimony. He does it. He doesn't recuse himself. And then this is the big problem with the Trump administration. They have what is arguably the most high-profile prisoner of all time. If you think to yourself right now in modern history of any individual that would be connected to individuals at such a high international power, whether it be the United States and our president, or as rumored to be in these documents, Ehud Barak in Israel, and then going into the banking industries, and then going into the technology industries, having what? Gates connections as well. Most high-profile prisoner in history. You know who else served at that prison? El Chapo. They kept El Chapo alive in Metro. And a lot of people missed this after the fact, after the second suicide, which was successful. They had not had a suicide in Metro for 13 years. So you're putting somebody in a facility you kept El Chapo in and kept him alive. No one's died for 13 years, and it takes 2 suicide attempts for Epstein to die. No footage in any of them. And you go after, legally in the beginning, the 2 security officers that were supposed to be watching for falling asleep. And they later dropped those charges, by the way, as they went through the court process. I mean, what do you really think happened? Bill Barr is career CIA, period. He was in the Central Intelligence Agency before he even became a lawyer and passed the bar exam. You can't make this up.
That is funny, yeah.
I mean, that's reality. You can all look into it. He was also named by several individuals during the Iran-Contra scandal, and in particular, the Mena, Arkansas aspect that links to Clinton, as a CIA fixer known as Robert Johnson. Also very involved with Bob Mueller as he was becoming the first attorney general under the Bush administration. The old one, the old man. That's when they were working on all that Noriega stuff. Weird. And that's why this network is important, because I believe through all this evidence, whether it be them not investigating the New Mexico ranch, or individuals like Wexner seemingly being exonerated, not delving deep into the banks, making it about just Ghislaine Maxwell and just Jeffrey Epstein, and putting out even this nonsense about a client list. It's not a client list. They have massive amounts of photographic and video evidence of those that were taped doing illegal things with Epstein by their own account in their own court cases.
Right.
So they have binders that are blacked out, that are this thick on a bookshelf, max hard drives that are stacked. So you're telling me none of that information is relevant, and there are no crimes taking place with high-level individuals. The problem is, in my belief, the vast majority of those high-level individuals are put there for a reason, because they are malleable, okay? Like there's a reason that Dennis Hassert became what? The Speaker of the House under the Republican Party, and the longest one at that. Yeah. And he was later labeled a serial child molester by a judge. Never did any time for that, by the way. And he was molesting these kids before he even got into politics. So how do you become from a gym teacher and a wrestling coach to one of the most powerful people in the Senate, never get charged with any of it. And when it comes out, you're an old man in a wheelchair and you serve 15 of your 18 months in a court case that's supposed to be related to extortion. This is madness, but it's how the system works.
Yeah, it's crazy that like it's just known. It's just a known fact that Epstein and all of his properties recorded everything that went on. There's all the pinhole cameras. You hear people talk about that all the time. Everything was recorded. There's mechanical rooms and on all of his properties where there's tons of footage, and yet none of his quote unquote client list, none of that's been. Where is that? Like, where's the follow up there? Like why is none of that revealed? Who was in that footage? And then you have, I mean, that's just insane that it basically has stopped with Jeffrey and Ghislaine Maxwell.
And then, the FBI has the hard drives and the tapes, so they know exactly who was compromised and who were on the tapes. They were even labeled. Like you can see in the New York mansion, they found the tapes with labels on them. So it's like they know exactly who is, in the swamp, so to speak. So... but you just glossed over a lot of really interesting information that I don't want to like pass up without kind of going into. So you mentioned Israel. So and the connections between Mossad and Epstein, and Ghislaine's dad, Robert Maxwell, was kind of widely known as a super spy, meaning he was a spy for multiple different nations, that being probably intelligence agencies of MI6, CIA, and Mossad, maybe more. Who knows? It's hard to really say how many, but kind of begs the question: like, what was Epstein? Was Epstein kind of like a super spy, so to speak? People say he's Mossad. I hear that a lot. That people think, oh, he's just an Israeli asset. Do you think he was kind of working the game on multiple different countries' intelligence fronts, or do you think it was more of a Israeli mission?
I think that Israel is a huge part of the military-industrial complex alliance that we've had post-World War II. In fact, without post-World War II, you don't have the nation state of Israel. And obviously, with the revelation of Five Eyes, you can visually see they are very much a part of this intelligence integration. And although you may have some infighting between the NSA, Central Intelligence Agency, Israeli Mossad, IDF, etc., there's still that kind of Anglo-American, Israeli, even Saudi alliance, especially in that Eurasian area. Okay, and it has been building and there for a very, very long time. You could go back to my films and my work on 9/11. It is common knowledge that the United States, Osama bin Laden, and the Pakistani ISI were absolutely the anti-Russian network that they were showing you in the Rambo movies when they were the freedom fighters, right? I mean, that's just a reality. So what I think, especially when you look at what else they labeled in that raid, yes, they had that safe. Yes, they admitted they had all those pictures. Yes, they had the binders and the hard drives and the burned DVDs. But they also had that passport where you had
to Saudi Arabia
identity for Saudi Arabia, again, part of that alliance I just told you about.
Right.
And when you go into something like 9/11, you get those same aspects. There's a Saudi Arabian aspect. There's an Israeli aspect. There's a Pakistani aspect. This is an international intelligence cartel. For instance, we go back to Iran-Contra. People don't understand this, but they need to. The U.S. never bought any weapons or shipped any weapons down to the Sandinistas. Israel did that for us. They bought them from Czechoslovakia and I believe the Ukraine. They were shipped down for plausible deniability. And then the drugs were shipped up. They made their money on the drugs, and then they paid back the Israelis, a plausible deniability circle. They were using people like Mark Rich then. So I think to label somebody just an Israeli agent or just a U.S. agent, especially Maxwell, as a precedent, you named all those agencies. Well, there was just recently, I believe it was the BBC, but they did a special now linking Maxwell to possible Russian intelligence. And whether that's disinformation or misinformation, now the possibilities arise because there's a lot of frenemy activity in these things, right? So now you have Epstein with Wexner. And I would say Wexner is that direct Israeli link that even goes beyond Ghislaine Maxwell and her father. For those that don't know about the Wexner Foundation, for instance, I believe it was the Frank report. And anybody can look into this. But it was a report that had leaked that was funded by the Wexner Foundation, where they were worried the United States was basically going to leave Iraq now that we toppled Saddam, that they were going to do what they said we're going to do. Go in, get out. We got the regime change. We're going to let them have freedom. We can't have that, according to this report. And in this report, they talked about propagandizing the American people. They talked about using pregnant women and children to sway them into staying there. So that just shows you that the Wexner Institute, and Les Wexner in particular, has a vested interest in geopolitics and the war machine and the presence of the U.S. military in particular in that region on behalf of what? An Israeli agenda. You had Netanyahu post 9/11 saying that event absolutely helped Israel in a major way. So I think when you look at Epstein, those connections are there, but Wexner is really the person to take a look at. And how do you make people malleable that are in power across the board? Now, yes, there are powerful women, but let's be honest. In large part, the power centers, especially through the 70s, 80s, 90s, even into the 2000s, largely men, right? You have pretty women around. And the other big secret, Victoria's Secret, and not just Les Wexner, but people like JeanLuc Burnell and Claude Hadid, is that there were different laws in Europe. So you would get girls as young as 14 in the 70s and 80s, and they would fly over into Europe and you would put them in dorm-like situations. And then you would basically take them to parties with these rich men, and you would compromise them, and they would like what they had, and you would do business with them. And this network went on for a very, very long time. So if you have constant access to pretty girls and women that want to be famous and are going to be willing to do anything and then be peer pressured if they're not, and be away from their family, literally thousands of miles. This is long before the email or the magic box. You have a pretty good network set up, right? And I've highlighted, you guys can go find it, but there were reports on Claude Hadid and him doing this way back in the day on 60 Minutes in the mid 80s or early 90s. And then JeanLuc Burnell is another one of these guys that also seems to have these Israeli connections. Weird, right? He's on the plane and with Ghislaine, literally in IDF hats. Like, that's the guy. And for those that don't know, JeanLuc never made it to trial. I believe sometime last year, he was found hanging in his cell in Spain, and he's no longer with us. He's another one of these loose ends that may or may not have been tied up. I'm not saying that he didn't commit suicide, but if he did commit suicide, what kind of squalor was he living in? So you could be made. A lot of people think that they're tough, right? I'm just telling you right now, after the first or second night of a beating or something worse, you might be willing to hang it up. And then someone just might come in and go, here's your shot. And you might take it, So it's a dark world, but especially with the Epstein stuff, that we've got to look at that dark world. And we got to look at it with reality, too. I think that's really important because there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there. Of course. You guys see that. Every 6 months, somebody's got the list, and all they're republishing is either a fake document or, and this is another relationship of how fake news and the media, they've been working with this system for a very long time, right? So one of the only ways that we do have a list of people that Epstein had contact information on. And remember, this isn't specific contact information. Later on in other court cases, you'll see partial flight lists and you'll see notepads and you'll see receipts, and that's something different. This was one of his personal black books. And the FBI didn't get us this black book. The police didn't get us this black book. No, a butler that worked for Epstein that seemed to have like a sliver of conscience or was in a pinch and wanted some scratch. Can't discount that.
Yeah, maybe.
Tried to give it to the media. No one would touch it. Nobody would touch it. So who does he give it to? He gives it to a guy named Nick Bryant, who has done tremendous work on human trafficking and is also the author of the Franklin Scandal, I believe. It's a great book, a must read, and really shows you how this network is also probably a part of Jeffrey Epstein without even naming him. And his source material is very thick. It's amazing. In fact, you guys should very much interview Nick Bryant.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So Nick Bryant gets this book, it should be a bombshell. This is after the Palm Beach case is already out. No one will touch it. This guy had written for Rolling Stone and I believe, a multitude of other major organizations. No one wants it. So who's he got to go to? He goes to Gawker. And Gawker is the only one. Okay. And for those that don't remember Gawker, as much of a rag as that was, and it was very much celebrity news and gossip, they published it. No one else would. And Gawker would later be put out of business. You know why they'd be put out of business? Because they also outed Peter Thiel, who's a very powerful individual, not only in tech and finance, but surveillance. Palantir, he was Trump's, technology secretary. And he didn't want to be outed. He got outed. There was nothing he could do. And later on, Gawker published the Hulk Hogan sex tape from the Bubble the Love Sponge thing. They did so illegally. And Thiel basically funded that lawsuit where it put them into complete bankruptcy and ended them as a media organization. So Hulk Hogan only got all that money because of Peter Thiel. Now think about that. That's another example of when the media does the right thing and is punished for it, even if it is a rag. And this is a reality. When the media, look at what's happening to Matt Taibbi right now. And Matt Taibbi, by the way, he and I had quite the exchange over 15 years ago over loose change when he was working for Rolling Stone. He was contentious with me and very much dismissive. And, I'm the conspiracy theorist.
Right.
He puts this information out and then he goes further and wants more from Musk. And then Musk starts censoring him. And now Musk is going after him. Now they might charge him with perjury for his testimony before Congress. That's all real. So right now, I've never seen it at this level before, but real journalists are being taken down. And, it's a scary time, not only to live in this country, but in the world. And I think that this is part of that network of compromise, man. They don't want this information out there for a reason, because it's not just one nation state. It shows that cooperation with a legitimate geopolitical global cabal.
I want to go back to zero in on Zoro Ranch again real quick. I want to ask you about when Epstein was originally convicted. Obviously, he had to register as a sex offender almost everywhere in the U.S. Except for New Mexico.
So it's not over. There was actually 20. I did a whole video on this. 20 plus states. It might have been even closer to 30. New Mexico among them. Yeah. Because the deal that Dershowitz got him, they had laws where basically you didn't have to register as a sex offender if that person, I believe, was like 17 or even 16.
16. Yeah.
Yes. So there were some that were even lower than that. So there were a slew of states, including New Mexico. I think there was only about 20 plus states he actually had to register at all as a sex offender in. That was one of the loopholes. It's amazing.
Yeah, but then also in New Mexico, he had to, or he didn't have to, but for some reason, every time he visited New Mexico, he informed the New Mexican government,
and law enforcement
that he was coming, even though he wasn't required to do that. So what do you make of that? Why do you think he was doing that?
Well, let's talk about that. Maybe not required because of what he had been convicted of or pled to, right? But we do know that he signed that document as working with the Federal Bureau of Investigation after the 2008 case with Robert Mueller on the document. Now, again, this guy's a billionaire. He's working with high-level people everywhere. His main partner and madam is connected to this huge media organization in the past. And then her family, I mean, they're World Economic Forum Davosed up guys, if you haven't looked at it. I mean, these are the true people, okay? So I think that, look, these agencies also compete at some level. And 9/11 is another great example of that. It's not just hiding information. I'm not sure if you're following right now, but more evidence has come out that Khalid al-Mihdhar and I believe it's Nawaf al-Hamzi were at least CIA assets, right? I mean, this is something
we already knew that. I mean, let's be honest.
They've known for years, but it's still. But at the same time, they're living with and renting from an FBI asset, an informant. Okay, so again, I think there's competing factions. I think they get onto each other at the same time. I also think there's infiltration. You go back to things like Annie Jacobson's done great work. Area 51 is a must read. Operation Paperclip is a must read. But it shows that internal conflict between NSA, CIA, and FBI in particular, and them vying for it. And then the Central Intelligence Agency in particular trying to seed their agents into other agencies covertly to still direct and manage those agencies as well. So, I think that at some level, obviously, Epstein's protected. That's pretty obvious. You could go to, at the time, it was Trump's Treasury Secretary? Was that what he was doing? Or was his AG? Who's the guy that gave him the sweetheart deal, okay, and was named and then asked about it? And when he said that it was reported that he gave him the deal because it was reported that he was intelligence and above his pay grade, was it Alexander Acosta? Acosta's the guy. I'm not sure if his last name. You can find this clip.
I'm not sure.
I think it's Acosta, but I don't quote me on it.
So he gets asked that, and he doesn't say that didn't happen. He just says, be careful what you read in the press. I think it was within 24 to 48 hours, he was side by side Donald Trump resigning. Okay. So again, you have, and that report is by Julie K. Brown, whether you like her, love her, or hate her. Okay. Julie Brown reports that. And she also reports, not only is there that intelligence connection, and that's why Acosta gave him the deal and it was above his pay grade, but that he was connected to who? Adnan Khashoggi. And what's Khashoggi notorious for? Arms dealing. And that's the next thing that nobody talks about with Epstein. You want to know what I think he was doing? I think he was also making arms deals. Why is that? Prince Andrew was the UK's largest arms dealer. That's what his gig was in the royal family. They paraded him around with the global military and all these nice little buttons and badges and esteem. But what he really did is he cut the European arms deals. So again, you have Epstein seemingly and possibly connected to that same network with the Saudi Arabian identity and a home and a passport and that protection during the 80s and 90s. And then later on, you have his connection, which is still built in the 80s and 90s with Wexner, but further with Wexner in the modeling industry. He gets caught, and then all of a sudden he signs that deal with the FBI. So I think that, to label him as one thing, especially when you have such limited information, right? That's tough, because I think these networks move very fluidly. And any kind... For instance, obviously Whitney Webb has done amazing work on this, but you have a long history of our intelligence agencies and our law enforcement agencies working with organized crime, working with actual criminals.
Right.
Even beyond that, we know the CIA works with the media via Operation Mockingbird. I mean, and it's not much, much worse. So look, I'm a trust no one guy, right? And I'm also a guy that looks at these documents, and I look at people's testimony, and I look at the media reports, and I just try to put them out there for people. And then I try to use discernment and put out what we know. Because again, we know the FBI has all this material, and we know that the FBI has shielded investigations at a high level in the past. For instance, guys, I mean, you guys look younger than me. I'm 43 years old. Can you name a time in modern history that somebody of significance within the United States government went to jail? Because I'm going to give you one person post Iran Contra, where a lot of those people were pardoned or had their sentences commuted. There's one guy, and it's so base level, it's embarrassing. But please tell me who's gone to jail.
Epstein.
No, not Epstein. I mean, we don't know that he was an actual official. One government official.
Oh, official.
Yeah, government official.
I don't know.
I don't know. I couldn't tell you.
Oh, wait, right? It's that bad. So Scooter Libby went to prison for the Enron scandal under the Bush administration.
Okay.
He was one of the right-hand men under Cheney, basically took the rap for Cheney. He didn't, that's a minor scandal when you look at Enron. Was pre 9/11, everybody, just so and it kind of went away after 9/11. People ignored it after that. He got pardoned by Trump. So we're living in this society now of 20 plus years of just brazen behavior by the military industrial complex that is completely unaccountable. And the best you've got is Scooter Libby. So I think these people are off the rails, man. I think we're living in 2023. If you're paying attention to just about anything, reality is inverted. And unfortunately, I think that now we are living what was prophesized by the Bilderberg Group, I believe back in 2018. You can go check out the headline. We're living in the post-truth world. And that's where we're at.
No, you did a good job there, like mapping out the information war coming from all sides. And one of the things we're about to interview Robert Malone too. And one of the things he talks about is fifth generational warfare, which is essentially a lot of what you're explaining. Is that one of the things is the Five Eyes Alliance, or there's even the Nine Eyes Alliance or the 14 Eyes Alliance, where these intelligence agencies work together. So if the CIA, for example, wants to do something against their own citizens, they can actually have somebody of MI5, MI6, Mossad do the work for them. That way they're not responsible, but they work in different ways. A good example of this that Robert Malone talks about is the fact that like his Wikipedia kept getting essentially hacked and like rewritten in a way that was really painting him in a bad light. Or another good example is, I think I'm kind of assuming, but it's hard. You're putting pieces together. Like Kanye, for example, his workout coach, essentially his handler, was of Canadian intelligence. And so you think like, why does the Canadian intelligence want to have anything to do with Kanye? Well, when you understand things like the Five Eyes Alliance or whatever, 9 or 14, it makes a little more sense that there's like this centralized control going on. And part of fifth generational warfare is you don't know what message is being propagated on you from where, meaning the enemy is unclear. So there's like an information war attack on the average citizen in every country, every developed first world country, and they don't even know that they're in a war. And like, where is the message that's being propagated on you coming from? You don't even know. There's all this ideological subversion, character assassination. You can name it all. Any kind of psyop possible is just being absolutely attacked on the average person in a way that's just, you know what I mean? It's like, how do you even fight? And like, is the best way to opt out of the fight? Is it to find the truth? And so that's kind of part of what we're doing and trying to make in this documentary is kind of weed our way through in just this like Zoro Ranch part. So I don't know, did you want to say something?
No, I mean, yeah, I think you're totally right there. If I had anything, I would. Have you ever heard? Do you know anything about the Zoro Trust?
Yeah, but they don't really know who owns it, right? Isn't that the whole deal about that?
Yeah.
Well,
so that's the whole thing. Like, I don't like to speculate because that's where you get into like underground lizard people and all that bullshit. Seriously, like whenever something like mysterious like that is mysterious, I always wait on the fence, right? Like even now with this banking case, there's some really big things, but unless it's in print, I'm not touching it, right? And you talked about fifth generational warfare. There are two things you guys got to do. One, are you aware of what signature reduction is?
No.
So I'll just show you this really quick. Exclusive inside the military secret undercover army. Now, number one, this lets you know that the Central Intelligence Agency has 60,000 people that are unnamed, that are totally outside of the Central Intelligence Agency, totally embedded within private corporations and companies, online and in person, with all these tools they're even showing you. Let me just show you this one, because it's good times here. It's almost unbelievable. So you think you're looking at a hand. Well, you're not. You're looking at a hand in a DARPA-created hand glove, the hand sleeve, if you're reading behind me, that can create any fingerprint and emit human oils. Okay, sorry, we went back to the old talk show. So in other words, if you have someone's human DNA and their biometrics, which everybody's pretty much given up at this point with their magic little box,
right?
Create a glove to set anybody up. There's a lot more in there. And I right before the Ukraine war, I almost had an interview with that guy. And then that happened. I'm not sure if he's overseas. I got to try to get him again. That's 2+ years old. Must read. Next thing before I leave you, there is a document called Future Strategic Warfare 2025. It is a NASA document, pre-9/11, 07/01. It is the blueprint for the last 20+ years. I've done extensive videos on that and its author, Dennis Bushnell, who has been one of the behind-the-scenes bureaucrats in the military-industrial complex you've never heard about, okay? And said, I'll just give you an example. I've got him in 2011 in a Blue Tech forum. So this is now 12 years ago. He's talking about human brain interfaces and brain chips, not just the cochlear implants. How many people did he say they had already put brain chips into?
I don't know.
10,000. Okay. So 10,000, 2011. So I get them at a different one. And by the way, it goes, well, you think I'm playing? You got to go watch.
I'm surprised. I didn't know people were already implanted.
Yeah, well, listen, 10,000 is nothing, guys. So you got to read this document first of all.
I will.
And it also has CNN syndrome in it. Talks about terrorist attacks inside the United States, transhumanism, the whole. I mean, this is it. Taking the press, fifth generation warfare, psychological internet warfare. It's all in there. In 2018, he brags and he starts talking about Musk and others. He loves Musk. Musk's a bad guy. Okay.
Oh, you think so?
Military industrial complex dude. They'd already put 200,000 brain chips in people. It's 200,000. And that's walking around. And that's 5 years ago now. This guy's still the head of NASA. He was around during the Gemini days, pre-Apollo. And he's got all sorts of fun patents too. So you watch, it's hard to find this stuff, but you watch, only about 20% of what NASA does is in space in particular. They help DARPA with a lot of the bio nanotech you never hear about. Here's a good book for you too, guys. Right here. You want scary? Read this.
All right.
This is 1997. You wouldn't even fucking believe it if I told you who wrote it and why. Like,
who wrote it?
Actually, all right, I'll just give you a quick one. I know I'm having fun with this now.
Yeah, I'm interested.
I want to talk about transhumanism, Gates, all these people. I think Epstein's a part of that. That's written by a person named Martine Rothblatt, Unzipped Genes. Okay? It's 1997. That's a person who basically put all the satellites up into the sky for the law for Sirius and XM, founded that, partnered with NASA, okay? Not just wrote that book, which proposes transgenics instead of eugenics. You can't make this shit up. That person is the most powerful transgender person on the planet, Martine Rothblatt, who also authored the book after that, From Transgender to Transhuman, and that's what this is all about. Hold on one second, I'll show it to you. You can get that one, I think, in PDF. Transgender to Transhuman. Okay? Now, this person, again, is a multi-billionaire. You can watch one of their, it's a manifesto on the freedom of form. This is 2011, this came out. So you can actually watch it. This person has built a robot of their wife who stayed with them during the transition, has kids, a family, is the founder of their own religion called Terrasim, where you may have seen Bina, I think it's Bina 48. Let's see. Yeah, there it is. So that's Rothblatt's wife / robot wife right there.
What?
I can't make it up. Then and you got to read their books because they're not fucking around, dude. They're not fucking playing around. I'm telling you, read this shit. It's unreal. Then she wrote Virtually Human. That's in 2015 with a forward by Kurzweil. And you just watch what Rothblatt talks about in the Transformers thing on C-SPAN. The keynote speaker, the first person. By the way, the rest of it is NASA, secrets of the space program, beyond rocket technology, and then internet censorship with the founders of Twitch and Reddit. And it's sponsored by Lockheed Martin and fucking Samsung and Amazon. Amazon loves you as well. But that person, that's what this is, man. So he's literally put hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars behind this whole thing with transgender kids. It has nothing. I mean, don't get me wrong. They want to sexualize children. They want to normalize that. They want to take them away from parents and empower the state. But ultimately, it is about you leaving your reality, this whole metaverse and even multiverse garbage, and that you can now identify as anything. And Rothblatt writes about and talks about mind clones, kind of the same thing that Kurzweil talked about so many years ago in The Age of Spiritual Machines. And essentially, these doppelgangers, these digital doppelgangers of ourselves will be given rights. And this is the non-carbon-based next species life, because there's two different things to do. Transhumanism on one end, these billionaires that are doing this, they think they can genetically live forever, right? That's the Epsteins of the world. They want to live forever. They want clones. They want de-aging technology. Peter Nygaard is a great example of that. He's still around right now, but was very, I don't know. Do you know what Nygaard was doing?
No.
Nygaard was knocking up girls as young as 14 on purpose so that they would abort their babies and then he would take the stem cells from the aborted fetus and inject them into himself as the monoclonal stem cell treatment. Again, you can't make it up. He's literally in a court case for those very things, like those very things. So they would literally offer them. They would try to get him pregnant. He was on all sorts of, TRT, the testosterone replacement therapy, all these things. If you watch it, like in his 70s, he was in incredible shape. But this is a reality, guys. These people are crazy. So on one end, it's the fountain of youth forever. Jared Kushner recently talked about his generation being the last generation to die or the first generation to live forever. That's not for most of us. For most of us, they want to convince you that your consciousness can now be uploaded to a digital reality. And that's what these books are about, dude. And I'm telling you, they don't want anyone believing in any kind of God. They don't want any kind of family. In Unzipped Genes, they talk about taking charge of baby making in the new millennium. Rothblatt. This is still like $40 to get this one. I had a fan send it to me. It's crazy. It's insane. This one's the transgender to transhuman. I mean, that book starts out by telling you that one day, basically marking down male or female on a baby that's born will be the same as marking somebody down as white or black in South Africa apartheid.
This is probably a good segue because it's funny because Epstein's Ranch was actually used for, and you mentioned it earlier, like a baby making factory, but further, it was kind of a eugenics play as well because he wanted to, he was trying to pick essentially the right girls, and he would go to scientific conferences both on his island and in his ranch and other places. And he was, deeply involved in Harvard, MIT, the rest of it, to find scientists, the science behind trying to make the genetically best humans possible to further his seed through the human race. So even like, and you might say this is crazy, but like this is a New York Times article. Like, go check it out. And I think it was something like 20 women at a time. I don't remember the exact numbers, but what do you make of something like that? And like, what do you make of what exactly Zoro Ranch was used for? Because it seems like there's some transhumanist ties to the whole thing. And what exactly was it's unclear what Epstein was trying to do with the transhumanism, except be an absolute psychopath.
Well, again, I think it's this quest for the fountain of youth.
Okay.
It's eternal, right? Think about it.
Yeah.
It's been written about forever. It's in movies. It's in, fables and lore. And I think especially those at the power centers of the world, right? Those that I would say that have been accustomed to things, entitled to things. It's very hard for them to realize, hey, they're mortal like the rest of us, right? Even at the end, David Rockefeller's in a wheelchair, not doing so great. Yeah, Henry Kissinger's still around. He doesn't even look like a human being anymore. And one day he will go. And I think it's that ultimate goal through technology. And it's certainly been espoused through science fiction for some time. So what's going on there? I think that you may have a Nygaard situation, which we just talked about. Maybe it wasn't the cloning of these Epstein babies, right? And the superior race, as was alluded to in the New York Times article. That could have been some of it, right? Testing genetics prenatally, et cetera. But maybe doing the same thing, aborting those fetuses, and then giving Epstein similar treatments to extend his life. Life extension technology. I think at the end of the day, when you're talking about these kind of eugenics experiments, and especially when you talk about the island of Dr. Moreau, which he is specifically cited as responding to as yes, you're talking about chimeric experiments as well. And for those that don't know what chimeras are, it's essentially you're taking some other type of life form, whether that be plant or animal based, and you are mixing it with another plant or animal based life form. You could say it's even GMO, genetically modified organisms. But, when you look at the human species itself, taking from other parts of nature, obviously that's possible. We've seen chimeric experiments in the public eye come to fruition well over a decade ago. Some really easy examples, for instance, are pigs that are extremely intelligent, are mammals. Yeah. They have been made to glow in the dark through what? Jellyfish DNA.
Yeah.
Obviously in the food supply, it's been known. So when you're working with somebody like Gates, for instance, that has openly done GMO experiments, not only with our crops and food and corn through his Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, but also with other life forms like mosquitoes. And for instance, has also advocated for GMO mosquitoes to spread what? Vaccinations for diseases such as malaria. The possibilities are really endless. And if he is working with all of these heads of banking behind the scenes, he's going to be able to fund a lot of these things. And if he's also totally exonerated of any kind of critical investigation because of the deals he's cut with whoever, and he has a safe space that appears to be Zoro Ranch, right? That's where you're going to do the majority of these things. New York City might not be the place, right? Even Florida and Palm Beach, as brazen as he was with the massages and the young girls, there were always rumors abound, right? Those things were discussed. You don't want rumors when it gets to scientific human experimentation. And that's why I think that kind of stuff was relegated to the islands and Zoro Ranch in particular.
Wow. Well, we appreciate you, man. Thanks for saying all that. Do you have any other follow-ups here? I know.
First of all, do you think this interview is going to be able to go up on YouTube? We were talking about it beforehand, like whether it's beyond the pale.
I said is 100% verifiable.
Yeah, well, that's not what I asked.
I think that you guys will get away with it. It's really interesting to me because the last video that got hit for me, and this is again a whole nother case, but one that the mainstream and the alternative are getting completely wrong, was on the Ricky Vaughn / Douglas Mackie case, the meme case. Are you guys aware of that?
I've vaguely heard of it.
So yeah, everybody's talking about how this guy Mackie made a meme and they charged him with election fraud and he got 10 years. It's totally not what the case was about. So because it actually has to do with the fact that that network was the actual Russian bot network and none of them were Russians. So while the FBI tells you Russia releases that GRU paper, right? And then the Mueller investigation, Mackie is actually part of the network that was the bot system that was like the pro-MAGA group, okay? And the real part of his case that nobody talked about was that they had a guy named Microchip come in and testify against him without giving his identity. And it's the first time I've ever heard this happen. So he actually
That's crazy.
testified against Mackie undercover as Microchip. His identity has not been revealed. They revealed that they had been talking to him since 2018 and that in 2021 they charged him with similar crimes to Mackie, but those are unspecified as well. And just so you guys know, this is the guy that claimed to actually start the QAnon nonsense on 4chan, and I actually believe him.
Really interesting.
The DEFCON crew that actually did it. So basically, they took down the real network that caused all that chaos. None of them were Russian. They flipped Mackie as far back in 2018. I interviewed 2 other people of that DEFCON network. DeFango, never trust him, but probably part of that. Really, you get into some really dark places, by the way, guys. But another guy named James Brower. And Microchip was supposed to come on. He wouldn't come on. They were constantly trying to feed me disinfo that he was some kind of an Israeli agent or asset or Mossad or whatever. But no, he got flipped and he's being protected. And there are more people that got flipped by the FBI and they're going to be charged too. And that's all the way back in 2018. So I pointed all this stuff out. They let my video go. My employers, Red Voice Media, clipped out 5 minutes of it, put on YouTube. They got a strike for cyberbullying or no, dangerous conspiracy theories. Dangerous conspiracy theories. That's what it was. And again, I'm exposing what actually happened. I'm showing mainstream articles. Go look into the Microchip fucking Mackie case. It's insane. That's where we're at now in the justice system. That they can bring in eyewitnesses they've flipped that you've never met in person that have been charged with unspecified crimes and you don't even know who they really are. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's nuts. That is crazy. Anonymous testimonies like that that's I mean, how do you even argue against
Why
it?
do you
How
even do it? What's the point if you're anonymous?
That's crazy.
Well, do you have any other information on Zoro Ranch that maybe we would want to get now before, like, I mean, obviously we're making a documentary, so we want to make sure we get everything that's possible that you might have in store, because you're obviously a super well-researched guy. And do you have any other sources that maybe we should look into? We dive pretty deep into it, and it's crazy. It goes up pretty high, and it's so high that it's almost scary to even talk about. But nonetheless, I'll give you the floor.
Yeah, I would say this. You can do this. Anybody can do this. Get all of the PDF files. There's some people that have now actually put together all the court files, but if not, Court Listener is an amazing resource where you can immediately get the PDF files once they're there, and then start doing keyword searches. And you're going to find it's not just Bill Richardson, but other people who are involved in politics like George Mitchell that were named. And by the way, Biden mentioned the other day. That's how entrenched this is. So I'd say do the keyword searches, let the documents speak for themselves, and let others speculate. As many first-hand sources as you're able to interview, get them on tape. That's what's really important. And I think that guys like Nick Bryant that I've suggested to you are a plethora of that type of knowledge, because, he worked on the inside with somebody who, again, leaked real information, ended up serving prison time for leaking that real information, and is no longer with us. So, you have to look at what, actions have consequences, but really Epstein's actions had consequences for a lot more people before they happened to him.
That's a good note to end on for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming on. Definitely, you should probably talk to him about JFK's brain. We're doing a video on JFK's missing brain later, so to see all the, I'm sure you have some great information on JFK too.
Yeah, you know what? Yeah,
Carter's an expert in that. He knows, he's deep.
Listen, man. So I did actually just a quick JFK thing.
Okay,
this was interesting. Have you seen the reports where Woody Harrelson is talking about possibly being the biological brother of Matthew McConaughey?
I have not heard that. No.
Dude, how do you know all this?
Listen, sounded like a gag, all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
A while back, when Woody went on SNL and challenged the vaccine narrative,
I
found a video that I was unaware of, or maybe I just missed it for the years or forgot about it, where he's talking to Barbara Walters and saying that his father, who'd been convicted of murder, was actually trained by the Central Intelligence Agency. And he says straight up that he was a CIA agent. So then in my comments section, people said, that he was accused of being one of the tramps at the JFK assassination in the car. What? And I was like, hold on, it gets even better. So I was unaware of that as well. And basically, once I found that out, and then I heard the McConaughey thing, and the story from Harrelson was basically, if you don't know, McConaughey's wife or mother constantly left her husband and would go on sabbatical sometimes for a year. And apparently, allegedly, if they're not goofing, she told Woody that she knew his father. You can go watch the interview on Colbert. And basically, the innuendo is that they had a sexual relationship. And McConaughey was actually born 9 months later after the sabbatical. They look incredibly alike. Now, Woody's dad is actually in The Men Who Killed Kennedy. And I played like the 4.5-minute clip where he's interviewed about it. He denies it, but he's shown the pictures of what is alleged to be him as an assassin there. And he talks about it. He later gets arrested for this killing of a judge. And he actually says that he killed Kennedy. And I have another clip of him inside jail talking to a reporter, saying that you would be naive to think the Central Intelligence Agency wasn't involved in Kennedy's assassination. And bringing it back full circle to the possible McConaughey fathering, a lot of people in my audience, again, judge it for yourself. You can go watch my video. I think it's from yesterday. Just skip to the good parts. They say that he sounds a lot, if not identical, to McConaughey. In other words, Woody's father. And Woody Harrelson still has a relationship with his dad. That's the thing. He's always had a relationship with his father. He was arrested when he was 7 and put away. But one of the things that brought this up on Colbert is he was talking about regrets in life and how, his father says he doesn't have any of them. Meanwhile, he's been in prison for all this time. So interesting JFK story to lead on. You guys have been fun.
Wow.
Yeah.
And check out the information. Again, I don't just spout the nonsense. I encourage people to check out all my documentary films. They're free. And I think that Fabled Enemies, especially on 9/11, I got Joe fucking Biden in that one back in the day, before he's even the vice president, admitting that he met with one of the money men behind 9/11 and get a life, like literally. And then in the second time he gets confronted about it, he says it's classified.